Unfortunately, having high blood sugar can lead to a whole host of kinds of problems and muscle problems, joint problems, nerve problems. When the excess sugar in the bloodstream binds with fats and proteins and DNA, it can lead to all kinds of problems. It makes it very sticky. It creates a lot of stiffness. It makes bones more stiff, but also more brittle. But if the question is, what's the most important thing I could be doing to protect my back and joints into the future, it's definitely going to be the right kinds of exercise. And if you said, well, what's the second most important thing? That would definitely be exercise. And the third is still probably exercise. Is that even though diabetes makes a lot of potential musculoskeletal problems more common, it doesn't make them inevitable. It doesn't make them not treatable. These are still largely solvable kinds of problems.
Welcome to Five Rivers Podcast. Today's topic is diabetes and musculoskeletal health. And I am delighted to have Dr. Grant Cooper with us today to discuss this very important topic. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misinformation about this topic. So Dr. Grant Cooper is here to address all of those. Welcome to the show, Dr. Cooper. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Perfect. Well, actually, before we get into any of the detailed discussion, would you mind introducing yourself and telling our audience a little bit about you?
Sure. So I'm Grant Cooper. I'm a medical doctor in Princeton, New Jersey, and I'm the co-director and co-founder of Princeton Spine Joint Center. And basically, our focus is on the non-surgical treatment of spine and joint pain and nerve pain. And so, of course, that we see patients of all stripes, and including lots of patients with diabetes, which is just one of the considerations that comes into play when you're treating folks with diabetes.
Very good, very good. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to having the discussion. So let's start with the mechanisms, the why things happen. Um, so in your experience, based on what you've seen, why does high blood sugar often lead to muscle issues, musculoskeletal problems?
Yeah, it's unfortunately, having high blood sugar, as I'm sure you know, and probably your audience knows as well, can lead to a whole host of kinds of problems. And muscle problems, joint problems, nerve problems are just some of the issues that folks with diabetes are going to face. And there's a there's a plethora of reasons for that.
Mm.
A big one is because of the AGEs, the advanced glycation end products. And those are just basically when the excess sugar in the bloodstream binds with fats and proteins and DNA, it can lead to all kinds of problems. It makes it very sticky. In the world of muscle and nerve, it creates a lot of stiffness. It makes bones more stiff, but also more brittle. It affects the nerves. It affects the collagen, and so it unfortunately hits you at a whole bunch of different places.
Mm.
What's important to, I think, also recognize in the same breath is that even though diabetes makes a lot of potential musculoskeletal problems more common, it doesn't make them inevitable. It doesn't make them non-treatable. It's just one more consideration along that pathway that we need to think about. But these are still largely solvable kinds of problems. Diabetes doesn't help, but it's not the end all be all either.
So if we were to look at from what I've seen, what I've read about, at the end of the day, chronic inflammation is the root cause culprit for a lot of different issues within our body. Some on the surface, some behind the surface, and obviously elevated blood glucose for a longer duration of time can lead to chronic inflammation. Can you explain the impact of chronic inflammation, or how does that contribute to joint deterioration, muscle damage, stiffness, pain? I know you
Yeah.
referred to it a little bit, but can you go into a little bit of detail of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hot topic because we're learning more and more about how inflammation is not just about what we're talking about, musculoskeletal, but also cardiac, pulmonary, infectious. Like so much of our problems turn out to be from, at least in part, from inflammation. In musculoskeletal, what happens is everyone gets arthritis in their body. By the time someone is 30, 50% of everybody has arthritis in their spine. By the time they're 60, that's basically 100%. And there's statistics like that across the board in musculoskeletal. 60% of people after 60 have rotator cuff tears and don't have any symptoms from it. So your body develops this wear and tear in it. And the reason why one person can have an MRI that looks like a disaster and have zero symptoms, another person can have that same MRI and be in agony, and everyone else will be somewhere in between, all with the same looking picture, is because it's not really the arthritis or a disc herniation that's going to cause these kinds of symptoms. It's when the body responds with inflammation to those degenerative changes that you're either going to have pain, numbness, weakness, etc., or not. And so handling the inflammation really is the crux of getting the symptoms to go away and for people to be more healthy. And so anything that's going to predispose to excess inflammation is going to be uh, a wind in the wrong direction, as it were, right? It's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with, and it's just going to make these things more likely. And then on top of that, with diabetes, you also have the vascular complications that can happen, and that can also lead to a difficulty with self-healing and stuff like that, that just sometimes people are going to need a little extra help. But at the end of the day, it is the inflammation that we need to deal with, and anything that increases inflammation. And unfortunately, having high blood sugars is a big one, is going to be something that, is going to be more difficult.
Yeah, yeah, got it. That's interesting, and the more I think about it, actually, from someone who's trying to manage, reverse, control type 2 diabetes, for example, right? Fitness is a big component of being able to do that, right? So you obviously you eat right as step one. You are active and moving around. Movement helps with a lot of those problems. Step two, and if that step is broken or if that step is interfered, obviously it makes a big impact, right? It becomes a Ouroboros, right? It's a self-feeding snake
Yeah,
at that point.
100%,
It's like
100%.
I can't do this, and that's why I'm not able to control my blood glucose, but I can control my blood glucose, and as a result, I can't go do the
100%.
fitness,
It's
right? So
such a yes. And then on top of that, what might resonate with some of your viewers is people, if they're overweight with
mm,
diabetes or just
mm,
overweight without diabetes, and they go
mm,
to their doctor and they have back pain, knee pain, hip pain, unfortunately, and I think this is terrible, but a lot of them get the advice of, well, you just need to lose weight.
yeah,
And that's not, it's not like losing weight wouldn't help, but at the same time, you try losing weight when you can't move because you have too much
yeah,
pain. And so there's a story that always sticks in my head, which is a patient that I saw. It was a while ago now. It's probably more than 5 years ago, but he was morbidly obese, just
mm,
just probably tipping 400 pounds, more than that.
wow,
And he had pain everywhere. And I was probably the eighth or ninth doctor that he had seen.
mm,
And he came in and he was dejected. And he said, "Look, I know what you're going to say. I need to lose weight." And what we did, long story a little bit shorter, is we ended up injecting his back that day.
mm,
And when I saw him back, which, by the way, so when you think about diabetes, just as a quick aside, when you inject when you inject people to try to get them better, a lot of the time we're using steroids, and
mm,
steroids have not a good effect on blood sugar, right? So there's a balance, but at the same time, you need to look at what's the downside of not doing it too, right?
mm,
And you just need to weigh these things together. So for this guy, he'd been going on for years and years, just being shuffled around and not knowing what to do, and not being able, feeling like he's trapped inside of his own
yeah,
body, right?
yeah,
So he comes back in about 3 weeks, and he was crying, and he was so happy. He had lost, I mean, I couldn't see it, but he had lost like 30 pounds.
mm,
And I said, "What did you do to lose the weight?" And he said, "All that's changed is that now when I want to change the television channel and the remote control is on the other side of the room, it doesn't hurt so much. So I get up and I go over and and just that little bit of extra movement throughout the day had allowed him to start losing weight." And the other thing that a lot of times you don't think about is that as you start to lose weight and start to exercise, one of the to me, it's always a little paradoxical, but one of the things that almost always happens is people start to eat better.
Mm.
It's just as you move, as you exercise, as you feel better. I mean, I always thought you would think of that as more of a license to eat worse because you're doing something good, so you feel like you can, but it's not. And I feel it from my own body too. Like if I'm in a good place of working out, I tend to make healthier choices when I'm eating,
Mm.
and I think that's basically true across the board. And certainly when you're stuck in your body, everything hurts and you can't move. I think people often will turn to junk food because
Yeah.
it's just you just want to feel something good for a
Yeah.
moment, right? And so you kind of eat your emotions in that. But when you start moving, you start feeling better, and that snowball starts to go in the right direction. You start making better eating choices, which makes it easier to get up and move around, and round it goes. Like you were saying, it can go round and round the wrong way, but it can also go round and round the right way too. And that's a fun part of treating people that have kind of felt stuck in their body and not sure how to break out of it. And sometimes the way to break out of it is simply to break out of it and say, like, we
Yeah.
need this inflammation to get out of your way
Yeah.
so you can start getting moving so that things can start rolling in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because a couple side notes, personal stories as well. As you were talking about this patient of yours, kind of spurred a little thing in my head. Um, I've always been active for the most part. Playing sports, coaching my kids' basketball team, soccer team, and all that. So I enjoyed that stuff, and that was my main source of working out and getting staying in as good a shape as I could. But as I got older, I was like, I need a little bit more help, right? So I got to go work out. I got to go do some weight training, some cardio, whatever the case might
Right.
be. And lo and behold, I did something and I got sciatica. Right? I got the sciatica pain, and I'm not able to figure out. I'm like, did I sleep wrong? What happened? So I went to the ortho, and he was able to detect it. And as a first step, I had to take steroids to say, hey, let's just calm it down a little bit before we work on it more, right? And I wear a glucose monitor, as part of the habit just to stay on top of what's going on. And all of a sudden, I was like, man, my eating habits are the same, but I'm seeing this massive spike in my blood glucose. I have no idea what's going on, and I'm getting concerned. So then I started doing some research. I was like, what? And I talked to our own physicians on staff, and they reminded me, they're like, you were taking steroids. I'm like, ah, the predness alone
it's
is to blame.
Yes,
you
yeah, it's
know?
amazing that people don't warn people about that, especially if you have a continuous glucose monitor. But yeah,
Yeah.
and oral steroids will do it much more than injectables, right? So with injectables,
Ah,
it's usually more like it'll go up 10, 20 points for about a week.
okay.
Some people are more sensitive. Everyone's different with these things. And so
Yeah.
some people are very sensitive and it will really spike it a lot. Most people, it'll be like 10 points. When you take oral steroids, forget about it. That's, because when you inject steroids in the spine, about 3% is going to make it back into your bloodstream, and similar statistics
Ah,
for like joints and tendons and stuff like that. So you just have a fraction of the dose that you get into your bloodstream as opposed to, but still people are still
yeah.
reticent to inject steroids, especially in someone who's had diabetes for a long time. But what else raises your blood sugar is pain, right?
Mm,
Pain will raise your blood sugar, and all of those. So there is a negative side to not treating pain, just like there can be
mm.
some downsides to the way that we treat pain, right? And so all those things have to be in the balance. And I have a cardiologist in town will sometimes send me patients who have high blood pressure who is having trouble getting the blood pressure under control. And then when they start talking more, they realize, well, this person has chronic pain, and then so the cardiologist will send to me to get the pain to go away. And a lot of times when the pain goes away, the blood pressure falls into line. And so, there's that. Now that's blood sugar, but I mean that's blood pressure. But you can imagine a similar kind of situation with blood sugars. And not to mention, if you're in pain, you're not sleeping as well. Not sleeping well will release more blood sugar. So it's just there's so many different factors that need to go into the calculus of what to do.
So why is that? I mean, that piques my curiosity massively because to me, as you said, right, there's the disruption of life which causes, mental fatigue or stress hormones to kick in, cortisol levels going up, you're not sleeping properly, your heart rate variability is off, right? And the glucose spikes. I get that. What I'm trying to figure out is from a pain perspective, is it body's natural response when it's in pain to do things like these, i.e., a blood pressure increase, or in for that patient that you just referred to from a cardiology perspective, it's taking something that is already not working, in this case blood pressure for that patient, and amplifying that or magnifying that negative, if you will. And in case of somebody who's struggling with diabetes, pain says, hey, what's the least common denominator of bad? Oh, blood glucose. All right, I'm just, the body's reaction is to spike it up. So I'm very curious, why is it
Oh,
that pain and or pain in specific, why would that do that? Is it natural reaction, or is there something more to it?
that's a great question. I mean, I think I'm not 100%. I don't think anybody really is completely, but I would imagine, you're going to be more in your sympathetic nervous system, right? So everything is going to be
Mm,
more activated, and I think that it's not. I wouldn't say that if you have, for example, diabetes, then the glucose is the thing that spikes because that's your weak point per se. I think it's more that everything's a little bit
heightened.
erect, but you notice the glucose the most, and that's the one that maybe gets
Because
most
you're
affected
tracking it the
because that's
most,
the
I
one
suppose. Yeah.
exactly. And you're well, you're tracking it, and also you're the least able to regulate it, even when you're doing well.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to if you don't sleep. Why,
Mm,
like if you don't sleep, if you're stressed, all of these things are going to be, you're going to have a similar cascade of unfortunately negative downsides. And
yeah.
I think similarly with pain, it's the same thing. And, when people don't sleep, they feel their pain worse, right? So it's also it goes both ways, I think, as well. And
Mm,
I would venture that if you're, if you have bad knee arthritis and you have a lot of pain from that, let's say, and then you also don't regulate your blood sugar because you just decide you're going to stop worrying about your diet for a while. I would imagine that that also exacerbates your knee to an extent as
yeah.
well, and sort of round and round it goes, which is why I think that we as the medical community need to continue to try and do a better job of treating people more holistically,
You're
and
right.
recognize that even if I'm treating your hip, I also need to be thinking about what else is going on in your body, from stress to diabetes to autoimmune conditions and all of that. I mean, a lot of times getting all of those other things better won't make the hip or the knee or whatever necessarily go away, but it'll certainly help, and it'll certainly get in the way if we're not also addressing those things. So
Mm.
it all kind of goes together in that sense, I would say.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is in our research, and obviously, we as a company obviously focus on the holistic side regardless. But when we look at actual literature for different diseases, and diabetes as one of the comorbidities that a patient is going through, or a percent of people are going through, how many diseases, the commonality, diabetes becomes the sort of the gateway to other conditions, right?
Oh,
and
100%.
and our health system, and again, this could turn into a philosophical discussion very quickly, but our health system, as the healthcare system in the US right now, we're about 30% off a $17 trillion GDP, 32%. So we're looking at closer to $5 trillion of healthcare spend, out of which $412 billion is specific to diabetes. But then when you add these other conditions, the hypertension, the
Yeah,
cardio, the obesity, and the top seven chronic conditions, all of a sudden you start seeing a pattern that keeps coming down to the same underlying factor, and it is frustrating
100%.
that it's like, my God, we almost have the key to the kingdom to say,
Right.
if you can just control this, you can control a lot. Yet we as a
Yeah.
society, and healthcare as an industry, and physicians who are trying to do the right thing, have been struggling to just get that under control. And
Yeah.
from your personal perspective, I'd love to hear. I mean, is it aggravating for you? Is it just like, my God, this is just so frustrating?
Well, and I would add to those are the patients that are diagnosed with diabetes. But
Fair
as we
enough.
talked about before, um, you know, everybody would benefit from having better control over their glucose and understanding what makes the spikes, because those AGEs that we mentioned before,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm,
advanced glycation end products, they happen in everybody, right? they,
mm,
they they happen more in diabetics because it's really when the glucose is spiking, and when it's raised for a long period of time, you're going to have the worst effect of that. But if you're someone that's spiking periodically throughout the day, that's also not going to be good for you, right? So if we could, so yes, you're going to see a greater expenditure of healthcare, greater comorbidities when the diabetes is poorly controlled. It's also going to be not great even when the diabetes is better controlled. But also people that aren't diabetic yet, let's say, or maybe
Mm.
they're never going to actually cross the line to diabetes, but maybe their blood sugar is not the best regulated
Mm.
throughout the day either. All of those folks could benefit from being aware of their blood sugars, which is why which is why I was interested in your company and was looking forward to talking with you on one level. Is so important, right? And
Mm.
yeah, yes, to your question about is it frustrating? I mean, sure, it's frustrating because on the one hand, we know so much of how so
Yeah.
much of this could be prevented with diet and exercise, better nutrition, some supplements maybe. But on the other hand, I also try to be careful not to be too fascistic about, blaming patients per se, because I see a lot with patients who, they're just not ready to make those kinds of lifestyle changes, and then they feel guilty about complaining. I mean, who else you can, it's like the reason you come to see me is to complain, right? So it's okay. It's okay to complain, but they feel guilty or like I'll give you a quick story. One of the first patients that I saw when we opened our practice was an old mentor of mine who was
Mm.
a physician, who I didn't know before, but when he came to see me, I found out he had back pain for many, many years. He had surgeries, and anyway, long story short, I gave him an injection. He was supposed to come back in a few weeks if he wasn't all better, and otherwise just off to therapy and do exercises. So anyway, I saw him back in about 7 months, and he was about 70% better. And I said, okay, that's good. Like, were you doing really great, and then it started to get worse again? Or he said, no, it was 70% better, but I just didn't come back because I felt so guilty that I hadn't gone to therapy. I hadn't done any of my
Mm.
exercises. Um, and so I just didn't really want to bother you with it. But, I figured I should really come back. And I was like, that's really stupid. That's
Yeah.
like, that's like if someone went to see you, as a primary care doctor, and you refused to give him Lipitor because the guy wouldn't stop eating French fries. It's like, you have to meet people where they
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think what we could be doing a better job on is trying to educate people, and maybe not even educate, that's overused. Maybe trying to inspire people
Mm.
more to
Mm.
to make better choices. I mean, look, I wish I was a huge Michael Jordan fan in the 90s, and I can see how people could be easily influenced as I was with commercials with people like Michael Jordan. And in retrospect, could we try to inspire our athletes to not be advertising McDonald's and Coca-Cola, but instead maybe healthier choices, those kinds of things, and to kind of instill better habits from a younger age, I think, would be amazingly good for individuals and communities. But
Yeah.
good luck with
No, well said.
that.
Well said. It's so important, and that's something that we take so much pride in. And you said it perfectly. Is meeting the people where they are, right?
Right.
Is and especially when it comes to fitness, right? And as we're working with our members and our community of folks that are trusting us with their diabetes care and reversal, is that fitness, in our perspective, has to be based on access, accessibility, and affordability, right? So as you get patients, for example, and somebody's got a bad arthritis in their knee, it is pointless for me to give them a fitness plan that puts more load on their knees, right?
Right.
Or if I have a patient that we just spoke with a patient that or a member that when she first joined our program, and she got diagnosed and joined our program at the beginning of this year or towards the first quarter, she her only hope was to be able to walk 10 minutes a day at a time, right? That, hey, I
Right.
just want to be able to walk 10 minutes on a treadmill. I know I'm not going to be a sprinter or a marathon runner. I know treadmill is easier because I don't have the wind resistance, I don't have the terrain, none of that, right? Just simple 10-minute walk. And our team constantly worked with her to help her get better,
Yeah.
slowly progress. And now she's walking 5 miles a day,
Yeah. It's awesome.
right?
It's great to see people get greedy for more
Yeah,
of
exactly.
that kind of exercise, because at first they think it's just not realistic, right?
Yeah,
And then it's like, I could, okay, let's, what else can I do?
yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just add to what you said is, not just those three things, but also they have to like it at
True.
least a little bit. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't do you good to design this perfect program. Well, especially in the world of pain. Like, so the thing that happens with pain is that once pain is gone,
Mm.
it's easy to forget it. And so
Mm.
when a lot of times after we get people better, they're really motivated to do whatever they need to do to keep it better. So they'll go to physical therapy, then they'll leave with like an hour of exercises, and I'll tell them, look, you're not going to keep doing this. You need to make this like 10 minutes.
Mm.
But people are like, no, I feel great. But the problem is, 6 months later, when you don't remember the pain, you're not going to do an hour of boring stuff for it. You might do 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And also for things that are more, especially with like diabetes, and you need people moving and
Mhm.
doing aerobic stuff, it's going to be hard to keep up that motivation if every day you have to go do it and you're like, I hate this, and
It looks like you are probably following my workout routine because, man, the thing that I hate the most is cardio, right? So you give me a cardio work, and I'm like, do you have something
right.
different for me
Right,
that I
right, right.
cannot
And
do?
which is where then you say, like, well, do you like pickleball? Do you like
Yeah,
tennis? Do you like, something more competitive? Or,
yeah,
you try to, as you say, meet them where they are, because
yeah,
otherwise you're going to lose them, right?
yeah,
It doesn't, it's and of course it's a balance. Sometimes, if you really hate everything that you're being asked to do, eventually you might just say, especially if you have diabetes, you might just say, yeah, you don't like it. Okay.
yeah,
But you got to do it,
yeah.
and then, you can make some choices, but hopefully,
Tough cookies, right? Whatever.
tough, yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
So now that we've had a great discussion at a high level and understand the causes of some of these issues, underlying cause and effect, if you will, let's dive deeper into the specifics from a body part perspective, right? Obviously, if you break it down to, let's say, spine, back, and joints, for example, or muscles, in that case, let's start with center of everything, spine, right? I mean, everything revolves around that one specific body part. So, what are some of the most common issues that you see from a spine perspective in folks with diabetes?
Well, with diabetes, so I guess I would put that into two different things. So, because the real answer is that people with diabetes have basically the same epidemiology as everybody else,
Mm.
with the more common things like back pain. Because for example, back pain is just so common, right? That
Uh-huh.
diabetics might be more prone to it, but they're gonna, when they get back pain, it's going to tend to fall into the same baskets as everyone else, which is, for chronic lower back pain, it's going to be discogenic is the most common, and then facets, and then sacroiliac joints. But basically, you're going to have the same kinds of problems. Where it will start to be different is more with nerves, and specifically with things like peripheral neuropathies, right? Where um, so not really spine, not really joint, or but I think that's where you really get a separation in diabetics. You will see this, this jump, because they have
Mhm.
this particular risk factor, which is that the nerves in general start to not function as well. There's a host of reasons for that we can get into, but that's where, and so that presents as usually numbness and tingling in the toes and feet, and will sometimes start to spread up and also into the hands. That's where you see the epidemiology really different in diabetics.
Okay, and as you said, that the impact on the spine across the board can be similar, from various conditions, and I think the effect of after it happens is also similar, right? The ability or lack thereof to be able to do a lot of things.
Yeah, it's in terms of the diagnosis. So if someone comes in with knee pain or hip pain or back pain, you can throw them all in the same bucket for this. And they also have diabetes. In terms of the diagnosis of their problem, the diabetes doesn't really play much of a role in terms of how you would go through working those different problems up. When you start the treatment aspect of it, though, that's where the diabetes becomes more of a
Ah,
factor. Not that it's, it depends on, first of all, are they controlled? Are they poorly controlled? All of those things. But you're definitely going to want to be taking that into account as you develop a treatment plan together. because of the considerations of the blood sugars and what steroids do to those, and sometimes there are other things that you could be injecting if you have to do an injection other than steroids that don't raise the blood sugar. So you
Mhm.
might, you might pull that out sooner than you might have otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. I smile or I laugh because I remember when on this that sciatica episode that I was telling you about, when I asked the doctor what are the possible, fixes, right, to the problem. And let's start with steroid. Let's go through physical therapy. Most of the time, that takes care of it. And then if it doesn't get better, if it becomes an issue, then we go through the epidural shot. And I was like, hold on, you're talking about the same epidural shot that what my wife got when she went into labor? He goes, yeah. I'm like, as in my spine. He's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. I will do
So
I will do physical
little
therapy.
point of a quick point of order. So he said, yeah, but that's because you're seeing an orthopedist who doesn't really do injections. An epidural for pain is completely different than one for pregnancy. Like
Okay.
they bear very little resemblance. So
Okay.
just so you know, and for your audience out there, the an epidural is just a word that means a certain thing. So epi
Ah.
is a Latin prefix that means outside of. Dura is the lining of the nerve root. So an epidural is something where you're putting something on the outside of the nerve roots. When you
Got it.
do it in pregnancy, it's a very rough and dirty procedure
Yeah.
where there's no X-ray because obviously you can use X-ray. Yeah, and you're injecting mass amounts of stuff, and you're going midline as an interlam. So it doesn't look,
Good.
it basically doesn't look anything like
Oh, phew.
the way an epidural should look for pain. So just so you know, like
Hey,
it's
I'm
not that's a question that comes up all the time, as you can imagine, during the day. And it's like, look, yes, it's really not the same. It shares a word and certain parameters,
yeah.
but otherwise they really shouldn't look too
Yeah, my
much the
wife
same.
was laughing really hard because she was like, "Ha! Now we're gonna see how tough you are." Because
You're
that stuff is
like, yeah,
not.
yeah, not that tough. No, 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 I
It's
don't
like
want to.
I'm
Yeah,
not. I'm not at all. I mean, from
no, thank
from
you.
that
Yeah.
perspective, it's funny. I saw this funny video on Instagram the other day. This woman is laying with her newborn baby, and she's recovering from childbirth and all that. And the husband walks by and he goes, "Finally, now she understands what it feels like to have a cold." I'm like, it's like, dude, you're gonna get in
Yeah,
a lot
exactly.
of trouble, for saying something like that. So let's not to digress, but let's talk about muscles in general. So how does diabetes affect muscles? Weakness, cramps, slow recovery. Are they common for people that have diabetes versus someone who's not diabetic?
Yeah, that probably is right, and that's where there's a again with diabetes. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that kind of scatter shots into everything. So it
Mm,
just makes everything a little bit worse, a little bit harder. Not much goes unscathed with that when the blood sugars are raised for a long time. Again, because of those advanced glycation end products and um, the the lack of vascular flow. There's a bunch of different things that start to happen. But so the way that you and as a stepping back for a moment, when you're thinking of treatment plans for other things, one of the things that you should probably be emphasizing with diabetic patients when they go to their exercise portion of getting better
mm,
is making sure they stay really well hydrated and of course manage the blood sugars well. But one of the things that can happen is you'll be more prone to getting dehydrated, and really need to make sure that you're staying nice and hydrated. That's one of the better ways, obviously also managing your blood sugars well, but it's one of the better ways of preventing the muscle cramps from happening in the first place. But yes, muscle cramps, nerve problems, joint stiffness, all of those things are going to be more common in diabetics. So I was going to say, so actually for acute stuff, back to thinking about when people come into the office with hip, knee, back kinds of things. The way I was answering that was really more about chronic kind of pain. So
mm,
pain that's lasted more than a few months.
mm.
Once that's happened, it all kind of falls into the same bag. But if someone came in and they had, um, a couple weeks of back pain, let's say, that could be a whole host of things from muscle spasms to ligament sprains. And there, if someone had diabetes, I mean, one of the questions you would want to know is how well controlled are your sugars, because that certainly could be playing an oversized role in that kind of a situation.
Okay.
It's once it gets to chronic that you're back to dealing with more structural kinds of things, and then you're back to treating the diabetes in terms of the diagnosis as just as sort of a byproduct, as a not a central feature.
So how do you in your world, what do you define as well controlled, and is it consistent across all specialties, or is it different for, for from your focus area versus, let's say, a cardiologist or
Oh,
a dentist or things like that?
I think it's consistent across all
Okay.
specialties, and I would be the first to defer to their endocrinologist or primary care
Okay,
about
got it.
that.
Got it.
But it's uh, with that said, I usually patients know if they're controlled or uncontrolled, and usually if they give you a number, if it's way out of whack, if their A1C is something ridiculous, it's pretty, that's pretty easy to read.
Okay.
Whereas if it's close to normal, then you say, okay, that's obviously more reassuring. And within broad swaths for my world, it's more it's not like I'm going to manage their diabetes,
Right,
right?
right.
It's more that we want to make sure that the patient and the patient's other doctors have made the connection between why this is really important.
Mm.
And also, something that I try to do is inspire patients to sort of try to look at, I mean, try to look at the pain that they're coming to see me with as hopefully an opportunity, because once we get it better, which we usually do pretty quickly, once we get that better, then that's really an inflection point that gives us a chance to make some good lifestyle
Right.
changes that are going to play a lot of positive downstream effects. One of those, and not a small one, is hopefully going to be on blood sugar management for diabetics and for non-diabetics as well.
Yeah.
It's just starting to take better care of yourself, essentially.
Got it. Now that we have obviously talked about specific body parts and the impact and sort of the big picture, now let's explore management, prevention, and some obviously key techniques. So, what would you say? What are some of the lifestyle changes that somebody could implement, or let's say somebody is suffering through musculoskeletal issues and might have type 2 diabetes, what sort of lifestyle changes would you recommend they consider taking, small and as well as big?
Well, for musculoskeletal stuff, the most important thing that anyone can do, diabetic or not, is going to be exercise, right? It's going to be getting the muscles
Mm,
to be strong and limber in a way that's going to support the joints, the spine, the whatever, so that those things basically don't take the stress of the day.
mm,
For example, you go through life and you're walking. When you have a heel strike, gravity's coming through you no matter what, right? The muscles can either contract and take the pressure off of your knee, let's say, or the muscle can be, a little lazy and not do it or not do it enough. And then gravity's coming either way. So then instead of the muscles taking that pressure is going to be going through the knee. Or, in the back, if you took your spine out of your body
mm.
and you put it on a table and you start putting an axial load on it, you're going to get about 35 pounds of pressure, and then things are going to start to break. Now, you weigh more than 35 pounds. We all weigh more than 35 pounds. The way that we go through the world without our spines breaking is that our muscles attach to the spine to unload it in the same way that the riggings on a sailboat will attach to the mast. Without those riggings, the mast falls over. It can't support its own weight. So the riggings are there to take the pressure off of the mast. Our muscles are there to take the pressure off of the spine. If the muscles are tight, if they're imbalanced, right? If they're not doing what we need them to do, they won't do a good job of unloading the spine. And then we're going to see more deterioration. So back to your question, when people say, what can I do to prevent these things in particular? The most, and usually that comes as, what supplements should I be taking,
Mm,
and I've done videos on supplements. I take a bunch of supplements, but if the question is, what's the most important thing I could be doing to protect my back and joints into the future? It's definitely going to be the right kinds of exercise. And if you said, well, what's the second most important thing? That would definitely be exercise. And the third is still probably
yeah.
exercise, right? And then, now alongside of that, and especially if we're talking about diabetics, I would throw in weight management.
Okay.
Especially for load bearing joints, definitely having a more targeted body weight is
Mm,
going to he's going to let those joints see less stress. But luckily, as you do your exercises, it's going to help you with your weight management anyway. So it's win-win, as we were saying before. And so really it's going to come down to doing the right kinds of exercises. And then you start talking about, well, and with diabetics, of course, also you want to be managing the blood glucose as
right.
well as possible. That goes without saying. And it goes without saying because it's not just about the spine and the joints, but it's about every
Mm,
single aspect of your body. That's going to be, point number one. But luckily, as you do your exercises, it's also going to make it easier to manage your blood glucose. So it all kind of goes synergistically together. And then, there are some supplements that I think are generally good, like curcumin, omega 3s. Um, there's a few others like bromelain that I think, tart cherries, that I think people could be taking. But if you were taking those thinking that that's what's going to save
substitute.
you, and so that you can sit on the couch, then that is a very bad trade-off.
Yeah.
So
It's
ideally you're doing all of it, but if you're going to choose exercise.
Yeah, there's a reason it's called a supplement, not a replacement, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's a good. I never heard
just
that. That's funny.
just
Yeah.
don't
Right.
augment something that you're doing good with that. That's the
Yes.
whole name of the game. So it sounds like obviously, as you said, exercise is probably the most important factor here that you discussed. Any recommendations on what exercises are safe that people should consider incorporating that into their day to day routine?
Yeah, sure. So if I was just designing a program designed to keep someone strong and durable and healthy into the future, it would probably look something like Pilates, where you're doing a lot of core strengthening and flexibility, mixed with maybe some weight training and also like running on an elliptical machine.
Okay.
Elliptical because it's weight bearing, so it's good for your bones, but it's not impact, so there's not as much grinding. Um, with that said, as we were talking about before, the best exercise program is going to be one that you'll actually do. So
Absolutely.
you want to balance that, right? So ideally you're going to pick things. And swimming is great. Ideally, you're going to pick things that aren't going to be so difficult on the body in terms of like grinding. If someone came and said, I want to do jujitsu, is that good for my spine? The answer is no, 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 definitely it's not good for your spine. But like I did jujitsu for a while, and I think it's a great exercise. I think it's great for you, but it's a balance, right? So
Yeah.
is that, if you're doing it because you just want to be strong and durable, that's not what you're going to choose, right?
Mm,
But if you're, and what you might say also is, as people get more into my age and beyond, if you're going to choose things like jujitsu or
mm,
like soccer or certainly any contact sport, but also just things that are more athletic, then the way that I would try to think of it is, don't think of like tennis as your exercise per se. Think of tennis as the game you like to play. So we need to exercise so that you're durable, so that when you go play tennis, you're less likely to get injured, right? And the reality is, when you're younger, you're going to get away with being able to, abuse your body more with those
yeah.
things. And as you get older, what we all find is that we can get away with that less and less. And with diabetics, this is one of those things where it does come into
Mm,
play,
mm.
where you're probably going to need to take a little better care of yourself, because you just have one more thing that's kind of going to make it more likely that you might develop a problem otherwise. So that's not to say don't do it. No, not at all. It's actually to say just do a little more.
Right.
Do a little more to get your body ready to go play the games that you like to play,
Yeah.
which are obviously good for you as well. It's just that if you're playing tennis, knees, shoulders, backs, so are all potential problems. So it would be good to spend a little bit of time making yourself more durable for those activities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed for myself specifically, I do play tennis, and my favorite sport is golf. Now, whether it's a sport or not, that's a debate for a later time.
Sure.
But for me, I've noticed the amount of stretching and warm up I need prior to a round of golf now continues to grow, right? So it's like
Yeah. Right.
if I'm playing in a tournament or if I've got something on the line, I'm like, all right, I need to get to the golf course an hour and 20 minutes before I actually tee off, so I
Exactly.
can get the body ready. So when I'm on the first tee, my first swing is not like, oh, you couldn't even turn your hips all the way or your back,
Right.
so the ball's gone all the way to
Yeah.
the right. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
hard thing. It's a
Yes,
hard thing.
and part of that is making yourself limber so that you hit the
Yeah,
ball better, and part of it is also to prevent injury.
yeah.
And and we all make these trade-offs, right? Like people can decide, hey, I like tennis, but I don't like tennis enough to put in the work during the week to get
Yeah,
myself ready for it.
yeah.
So maybe I'll play doubles, or maybe I'll find
Pickleball.
something else. Yeah, pickleball singles is tough on the
It
body. I see
is.
a
It
lot of
is.
yeah, but doubles pickleball is not, it's a little easier obviously, but
I
pickleball is a lot of like squash, it's a lot of
yeah.
cutting back and forth.
I heard somebody refer to pickleball as baby tennis the other day, so I thought
Maybe
that was pretty funny. When it's like, I'm gonna go play baby tennis, like, all right, that's kind of makes sense, right?
yeah,
Smaller
yeah,
court and all. All right, well,
yeah.
what are some of the most common myths that you hear when it comes to diabetes, for example, and musculoskeletal health?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of myths I hear about in my field in general. With diabetes in particular, um, I would say that the big misconceptions that people have, or the things that when patients come in, um, we need to disabuse them of pretty quickly because they're holding on to them, is one, no one can do anything for me until I just lose weight,
Mm,
because,
mm,
and that's just completely um, a bad message that the medical community has sent these folks, that they need to stop, because that's just not true, and certainly, as we talked about before, losing weight is always going to be helpful,
right,
but that
right.
shouldn't be, that's just one piece, often a relatively small piece, of getting someone better. The others, I guess it's sometimes, especially when it comes to like getting a treatment plan, it's not that we always inject steroids, but when steroid injections are on the table, a lot of patients have been told at some point, well, I can't have a steroid injection because I have diabetes and it's going to raise my blood sugars too much. And for all the reasons we've already talked about, that's just not true, and it's a consideration. It's not there are very few black and whites in medicine. It's usually some kind of a gray. So you balance these things, right?
Mm,
But the thing that people aren't recognizing a lot of times is the negative aspects of having the pain in their body,
mm,
both in terms of the cortisol and in terms of just not moving around, not exercising, all of the things, and so that's a trade-off, and you need to take all of that into consideration when you're getting someone better. But what you shouldn't let diabetes do, and maybe this is the take-home point, is you shouldn't let diabetes stop you from getting better, right? You shouldn't let anyone make you think that just because you have diabetes, that all of these kinds of musculoskeletal pains are inevitable or unfixable, because that's
mm,
simply not, that's just absolutely not the case. And maybe one other myth is also, oh, let me actually give you two. So when it comes to diabetic neuropathies, there's two misconceptions with diabetic neuropathies, and this I see a lot because I see a lot of folks with numbness and
mm,
tingling and neuropathies, and a lot of times, well, two things. One is that when people really do have a diabetic neuropathy, and that's what's causing their symptoms, a lot of times they think that they can't, there's nothing that can be done about it. And it's true that it's difficult, and it's true that you can't, we don't really have a way to fix the damage that might have been done already by the diabetes on the nerves
nerves.
sometimes. But that doesn't mean we can't get the symptoms better.
Mm,
There's supplements, there's nerve stimulators, there's different things that one can do. So it's worth talking to your doctor.
mm,
But I think that the bigger thing and the bigger missed opportunity for folks with diabetes who have numbness and tingling, is twofold. So one is that a lot of times they have diabetes, they get numbness and tingling in their feet, and then their doctor tells them, "Oh, it's because you have diabetes," and that's the end of it. And so they just go through life thinking that's why they have the numbness and tingling, and they never actually look into it.
Mm.
And sometimes it's true, they have a diabetic neuropathy, but a lot of times it's not true. There's a lot of, just because someone has diabetes doesn't mean they can't also get all sorts of other kinds of reasons to have numbness and tingling in their feet. And so a lot of times, because of the diabetes, it just gets missed because it just gets put in this basket, and no one ever did. Usually we do a nerve test to look at it, and no one ever looked. And
Mm.
so then when you look, sometimes you'll see they have tarsal tunnel, or pinched nerve in their back,
Mm.
or something else causing the neuropathy that actually can be fixed, like a low thyroid, or low folate, low B, etc. So you need to look, is the point, or else you're going to miss a lot of people that you could have helped. And then on top of that, some people who have had nerve tests and they've been properly diagnosed with diabetic neuropathy, but I give it air quotes because when I say that, what they've done is they've looked at, and someone got a nerve test, they
Mm.
started the nerve test, they saw the neuropathy, and then they stopped the nerve test. And they didn't, because the nerve test is one of those things where if you don't look for something, you're not going to find it. And if you do
Mm.
find something and you stop, then you don't have a chance to find if something else is there.
Mm.
And something that happens a lot in medicine is something called double crush syndrome. What double crush is when it basically just describes a situation where there are two problems that both can be causing the same symptoms. So, for example, maybe you have a diabetic neuropathy and also you have a pinched nerve
Pinched
in your
nerve, yeah.
back. And if you don't go and look for the pinched nerve, then you don't know it's there, and you just think it's all due to the diabetic neuropathy. Well, you might not be able to cure the diabetic neuropathy, but guess what? You can get the pinched nerve better. So a lot of folks that I've seen in the last few years, partly because I've done some videos on YouTube that have gotten a lot of views. And so people come in asking about this. And what happens is just this situation, they have a diabetic neuropathy, no one ever looked for anything
Right.
else. And, sometimes, so then we go looking. And look, sometimes you don't find anything else, right? It's not always that there's a double crush, but sometimes you do. And the
Mm.
nice thing about finding the other problem is that most of the other problems you can often get better. And then what usually happens is that not all of the symptoms go away, but a lot of them do.
Mm.
And so maybe before the diabetic neuropathy was making life misery, but now you identify another problem, you make that problem go away,
Yeah.
and now instead of it being misery, it's just annoying,
Yeah.
right? Which is a win, right? You would take that. So I think that's a, I don't know if you call it a myth, but it's a major misconception, and it's a major missed opportunity that leads a lot of patients to suffer when they don't need to. And
That
so
is
that's, yeah.
that is so fascinating, the double crush syndrome. And as you were talking, I was thinking about it, the application of that. Uh, I mean, throughout our lives, right? I mean, no matter what sort of challenges you're going through, or even take home repair, for example, you might have two things that are causing a plumbing issue in the
Right.
house, right?
Yes.
You take care of one, not paying attention to the other one that's also back there. Well,
Yes.
you're not really doing anything except for kicking the can down the road, and you
Right.
just don't know the contribution of the other plumbing issue to the bigger problem. And you've
Exactly.
got to be able, that's a I got to look into this because that's a very fascinating, I think there's a lot of application to that
Yeah, one hundred
terminology
percent.
in real life.
And that's actually the analogy that I usually use with patients is like a stream that's being blocked at two. It's kind of like the
Right.
plumbing, right? It's like you
Yeah.
have, yeah, and I would imagine that some plumbers, I have no idea if this is true, but it makes sense to me that some plumbers might look and they find the problem, they find the problem really fast, and they stop
Right.
there, they fix that, things get better, everyone's happy until it starts up again, because other, and then the better plumber presumably looks there but says, I just got to make sure that there's not this other thing that sometimes goes wrong also, because it takes more time, it's more, and then sometimes they don't find it, right? And then they've wasted this, quote unquote, wasted the time making, so I think it just, it goes back to looking at things more
Right.
holistically and not just looking at the symptom, but trying to understand all of the places that things can go wrong.
Maybe you can start using a tagline, Dr. Grant Cooper, I'm even a better plumber, right? So I look at all the
No,
issues,
no,
not
I,
just one.
I, I I get myself into, I usually describe, doing a nerve test is like checking the wires in the wall. But I've had a
Mm.
few patients that are electricians who I was telling them this about the nerve test, and they're like, that's not how we check wires. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, To the layperson, it makes sense that that's how you might check a wire.
Exactly
So,
right. I'm gonna stay in my lane. I get the point,
right,
right?
right,
Kind of
right,
deal,
right,
right?
right,
Well,
right.
Dr. Cooper, this has been fascinating, and I loved our discussion, and I know we'll have plenty more. And thank you so much for sharing, the tips, the pointers. Before you go, tell our audience how they can find you, where they can look for you, how can they follow you.
Oh, I should have thought of that before. Well, our website is princetonsjc.com. That's our practice website. And if you go to YouTube and you put in Princeton Spine and Joint Center, our YouTube page will come up, and we've got it's just full of informational videos that for these kinds of things, different kinds of musculoskeletal problems, neuropathies, and we take a problem and we go into detail on it and try to explain it in an easy way. And so on YouTube and our practice website is where you could
Perfect.
find us.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
No, this has been great, folks. There you have it, Dr. Grant Cooper. Please do follow him. You'll obviously learn a lot as we have. And once again, this is my name is Sandeep. I'm the co-founder of Heald. And if you're interested in Heald, please do visit our website at iheald.com. And we look forward to talking to you on the next episode. Thank you.